this John Carvalho proposal, which is related to the actual Bitcoin that we have that actually works. But it's a pretty big change depending on how you see it. It's a pretty big kind of new style of thinking about Bitcoin. So I'll read out a little bit of the proposal here. This is so John Carvalho is a prominent Bitcoin advocate. He's recently proposed a significant change to how we define and use the term Bitcoin in the cryptocurrency ecosystem. His proposal, outlined in a new Bitcoin Improvement Proposal, or BIP, suggests defining the smallest unit of Bitcoin, the Satoshi, as the standard denomination, effectively ditching the decimal places we're accustomed to when dealing with Bitcoin amounts. This move aims to streamline user comprehension, eliminate confusion around decimal usage, and align more closely with Bitcoin's protocol, which fundamentally deals with whole numbers. So this is basically saying, instead of talking about Bitcoin as 21 million, actually accept the fact that it's 21 quadrillion, I think is that the right number? Oops.
2.1 quadrillion.
2.1 quadrillion. Okay. So instead of calling it 21 million, call it 2.1 quadrillion, which is really just what we call Satoshi level today, which my understanding is this is actually how it's written in the code, right? That there is no Bitcoin
consensus 100 million. Here, it is that unit. Yes.
Yeah. So this has been kind of making some waves in the ecosystem. Like, what are your thoughts? I think, Steve, at least in the group chat, you had a bunch of like reasons why. I think you were saying this is obvious, it's going to happen, like, duh.
I don't know if I'd frame it that way, but I've been thinking this way for over a year, and our friend and colleague Bob has as well. In fact, he baked it into his product already. His app uses this standard that John just proposed as a BIP, right? So he's an advocate for it. So we can get into like why. I wouldn't frame it as like the reason why is like, oh, let's make it 2.1 quadrillion versus 21 million. That's a disadvantage of this. Because 21 million, like if you take, let's say 2 billion people have heard of Bitcoin. And then like, if you ask people, what do you know about Bitcoin? Like probably one of the highest percentage of things that they know about is like that there's 21 million. It's fixed. There's never going to be more, right? And that's also probably the number one attribute of Bitcoin that would get defense from all Bitcoiners would defend against having this fixed supply, which everyone knows as 21 million. Now, there's 2.1 quadrillion. It doesn't actually change that whatsoever. It's like, you can think of it as mentally like a stock split, basically. So it doesn't change that economics or the credibility or certainty of the supply. It doesn't change any of that, but just the meme of 21 million kind of might be affected by this. So that's a drawback. Why does Bob like it? I think Bob likes it because he's creating Boardwalk Cash, which is an app that's intended to allow people to spend Bitcoin and small amounts. And anyone working on like using the Cashew protocol or Fedimint or Lightning or any kind of spending application with Bitcoin, people aren't daily spending, 1 Bitcoin or more. They're spending what some people in the space call sats. And so people that work in Bitcoin probably call it sats, probably think everyone thinks and knows about sats. But my estimation is 2 billion people have heard of Bitcoin and 200,000 people have heard of sats. Like a tiny, minuscule amount of humans are aware of sats. So I'd say that the heart of this argument is that like everyone knows Bitcoin, no one knows sats. People just want to send, receive, buy, receive Bitcoin. Bitcoin's money. It's becoming money. It'll become a currency that people spend, and they just want to receive Bitcoin. Anecdotally, I've come across many people who they look at a wallet and they see sats and they're like, "Oh, is that a shitcoin, or is that a new token? Or should I invest in sats?" Same with Lightning. People will see a Lightning tab and they're like, "Oh, should I invest in that?" It's like, no, it's a nerd technology layer that should be hidden from you. People just want to send and receive Bitcoin. So I think it makes way more sense to just call it Bitcoin. So Bob in his Boardwalk Cash app calls sats Bitcoin. So this unit of, this tiny, tiny unit, 100 million of these units in what the world today calls a Bitcoin. And it just makes the user experience way better. Like you're sending 150 sats instead of 0.000000025 sats. Like no one deals with decimals like that. It's extremely difficult to like wrap your head around it, know what you're sending and receiving. It's error prone, which is why people are proponents of sats, because you get rid of all the decimal places. But then the separate argument is like, well, should we call it this new thing sats? Or should we just call it Bitcoin? And so then the counter argument is like, well, first of all, like coordination, like how are we going to coordinate everyone to switch? And then confusion. Won't it cause confusion? For one, that does it destroy the 21 million meme, and does that hurt Bitcoin? Also, just like, yeah, are people going to make a mistake? Like they thought they were buying one thing and they got rugged because it's actually, like, I actually find that a pretty weak argument. It's 100 million times different. So any situation, like if you thought you were getting one thing and it's 100 million times off, it kind of makes you pause and reflect and wonder. Like, I doubt you're going to click a button and think you just bought, 1 million Bitcoin or something, when in fact it was just a fraction of a Bitcoin. When
I think you underestimate people's.
But then, also, well, I mean, so I would suggest people check out Boardwalk Cash, look at the UI and see for themselves. Do they think it's confusing or not? I don't. Secondly, I just mentally looked through at Cash App and a few other products. Like, what if they made this change? How would I go about doing it? And I didn't actually like create the mocks. I just did it in my head, but it feels completely reasonable to change it and not create confusion. You also can imagine during a transition period, like a product like Cash App, if it were to change it, you could have a little like help tip or, some kind of note, like help easing that transition and educating people of this shift as well. So even though I think it's doubtful that people are going to really think they're getting 100 million more or less of whatever they thought, they still might be like, why did this change, or why is it change? And then, so if there's a little help tip, I think that's all like totally feasible. Another argument to do it, I find the argument about spending and just dealing, like awareness of the Bitcoin brand, keeping it simple, that you send and receive Bitcoin, and that to prepare for a future of Bitcoin payments as a currency. That's, to me, the primary argument for why we should do this. A secondary argument, but other people like it even more so, I think, is around trading. And, the psychology of like, Bitcoin's too expensive for me now. It's $102,000 or whatever. I don't have $102,000. I can't invest in Bitcoin. And I don't know how big the problem is today, but certainly over the last 8 years, I've come across so many people who are new to the space, and they literally think they can't buy a fractional Bitcoin, so they don't think they can buy Bitcoin. Maybe that problem's getting solved, but that's one psychological hurdle. Another psychological hurdle I've seen is a reason people buy altcoins is because they're cheaper. So like XRP is like whatever it is, like 39 cents, or, it's in Dogecoin is some decimal point. And a lot of humans think there's more room for it to go up than Bitcoin. There's more room for it to go. Like it only has to go to $3 and I'm a millionaire. And that's really poor economic analysis and fundamental understanding. Nonetheless, a lot of humans think that way. And especially at the beginning of their journey, if Bitcoin is all of a sudden priced much less, maybe it addresses that. Again, I'm not a huge proponent of that argument, even though I acknowledge that's a psychological reality. I personally don't think like we should have this big move towards that just for that reason. I think it's the first reason for me is why I think it makes sense. Another aspect to this that is starting to be discussed and should be discussed is like, does this need to be some like one big moment where the world changes and a big marketing event and like there's a bunch of coordination among major players that it all switches on this day? Or is it gradual? And I've heard other people feel like it needs to be a big moment of marketing, that actually is necessary to avoid confusion.
Like we need BlackRock to come and say, this is fine.
Well, like, you imagine finance going,
You have our permission.
But
right.
I actually think gradual is more realistically how it would be done if it's going to be done. And I think it can be successful that way. And as an example, again, Boardwalk Cash and actually some other product piped up on Twitter saying, hey, we've already done it too. So there's at least 2 examples of products that have already done this. Unilateral decision. They decided to do it in their product. They feel it's the right decision for their product. Didn't require anyone else to bless it or give permission. I think spending apps will trend, or I shouldn't say that aggressively. I think there's a good chance that spending apps will trend this way. And that's sort of like who should be like sold on this idea, like use Bitcoin, not sats. And let them realize, oh, it doesn't create a confusing situation and it's actually a better way to go about it for my app. And then more and more spending apps do that. And assuming Bitcoin takes off as a currency, let's say over the next 10 years, it takes off as a currency, 99% of people that are using Bitcoin on a daily basis aren't moving, $1 million a day. They're not moving 1+ Bitcoin. They're moving what we call sats today. So 99% of people might be introduced to using Bitcoin on a daily basis through products like Boardwalk Cash and many more to come. And they'll all be exposed to it just being called Bitcoin, and it'll be native and natural to them. And only the old timers will be complaining about, like, get all cranky about, why are we changing?
Back in my day, get off my lawn. Yeah, so I want to just add slightly a nuance, but I mean, you covered everything really well there. I agree with all that. I think it's all good argumentation. The one thing that I personally am really a fan of, or just don't think it's realistic, is like doing it as a BIP. Like, I get it. It's good that people are talking about it. I'm glad it's causing this discussion. I tend to agree. It's going to be a lot better for payments. And I think we all want to see this as a currency, not just a sort of investment goal asset. So 100% agree with all of that. The one thing I would say is just like the reality of the way Bitcoin, just nature of reality works is, emergent. And so to me, the one thing that I strongly disagree with, and you're kind of hinting at this, is trying to be like, oh, there's this like top down sanction. Like, we need to, like, as a community, agree it as a BIP. Like, no, the way language forms, the way language is always formed, in any language, computer, natural, otherwise, is emergent, and you find shelling points for things. And so my view is, I think every actor should basically act individually on this. I don't think it should be approved as a BIP. I think that's kind of silly to me. I think that Bob is taking an incredible lead here, and like, he believes in that. And so he's putting his money where his mouth is. And if people like that, and if someone like Cash App, for example, the company like that says, yeah, we also agree, then that'll start a natural movement. So I think doing it as a BIP is great to get a conversation started, but I think the whole point of systems like Bitcoin, systems like nature, or like language, is to let things emerge. And so I think the transition should be gradual. I think if it even happens, right? I think sort of the market will decide over time. I will say Satoshi's sats, while I agree with you, Steve, that it is a very small number of very nerdy people that know what sats are. It's the same way Bitcoin started off too. So I do think there's a chance that we already have enough critical mass of the nerds and the tastemakers for sats to go mainstream. I agree. I think in the abstract, if I were waving a magic wand, Bitcoin is better. But I would say every company and every individual actor, just like with a node, should make their own decision. And in 10 years' time, we'll know.
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of the bottoms up stuff. Like, that's the ethos of Bitcoin and the internet. So I'm generally a fan of that. But I think, many years ago, Steve convinced me that actually, like, being a point for information coordination across the ecosystem is a really underserved and valuable and needed thing. So I wonder, like, one, is there somebody who's, outside of John who wrote the BIP, is there somebody else who may take this up as like a kind of becoming that coordination, kind of information coordination hub, or is maybe that's something John's interested in? And then, and then separately, like, if we really think that this is going to happen because of the payment apps, which, like, I kind of agree and see the logic in that, but I almost feel like that assumes that payments is kind of really here and at scale today. If we're going to sort of lead with payments, payments is going to lead that change, and that'll kind of get to the rest of the ecosystem. So then does the whole ecosystem get held back from this change until payments has a great use case?
If that's how it plays out, yes. But okay, what's wrong with that? I mean, I don't see some imminent need that this has to be changed in 2025, or Bitcoin fails. So I have several comments. Yeah, regarding sats, Max. I mean, I'd say the default path right now is that we go from, let's say, 200,000 people aware sats to millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, and it's called sats. And I don't think we failed if that happens. I don't think that's like bad.
Right.
I've called it sats. I mean, it's fine.
Yeah.
I actually just think calling it Bitcoin is better. So for me, it's just like Bitcoin would be better than sats. I do see a plausible way for it to pan out that way. So I'm glad John stated that publicly.
Sure. Yeah.
They'd only had private conversations previously. But yeah, I don't think it's a disaster if it's called sats. Another quick note though, I don't feel as strongly about this, but some people in Bitcoin feel very strongly like they don't like Satoshis and sats as a name. They think it's disgraceful.
Disgraceful.
Why is it disgraceful?
Because they don't think Satoshi would have wanted his name used that way.
It's too
He
egocentric.
never named it that way.
That sounds kind of culty to me.
Okay.
So, well, like I said, I don't feel super, that people I respect actually feel pretty strongly about that. So that another factor. I'd also, like, I mean, as we both said, Matt, you and me, we both said, like, you know, having it be emergent and sort of bottoms up is natural and the likely path. So we agree on that. Now, part of that though is, I mean, I totally agree. Like each individual act can like make their decision, like we've already seen in products, but that also could be, there could still be a moment. Like there's, again, Coinbase, River, like Binance, Cash App, they can partner with each other and be like, this is our day. We're going to announce this day. And that's totally fine too. It emerged bottoms up. They happen to partner with each other. It's not top down. I could see that happening. Let's say a couple of the last point I had was around the BIPs. I don't know if I disagree with you or just simply like to add more about BIP. I think BIPs are like misunderstood as well. So for the audience that doesn't know what BIP means, Bitcoin Improvement Proposal. So it's just a proposal to improve Bitcoin. And so it's just a document. Anyone can create one and publish it. It's pretty minimal requirements to be blessed and actually get like an official BIP number. Getting an official BIP number doesn't mean that like it's a great idea, that it's fully like specced out and tight and like technically good. It doesn't mean consensus. It doesn't mean anyone's going to implement it. It doesn't mean anyone has implemented it. It means none of that. Just getting a BIP number kind of just means like your grammar is correct and you filled out the format. You filled out the form correctly.
Who gives them numbers? Who gives them numbers? Who takes a BIP and sort of blesses it with a number?
It's a GitHub repo. The BIPs are a GitHub repo, and there's maintainers of that repo. And historically, it's been Luke Dash Jr. And a second person was added, I don't know, a number of years ago. But the two of them, like, it was kind of becoming a bottleneck for, a variety of reasons. So earlier this year, I think 3 or 4 new BIP editors were added who ensure that any submitted BIP basically meets a certain criteria. Again, not really technical assessment or anything else, but just does it follow the process?
Mm-hmm.
And then if it does, then they assign it a number. But I do think people are just unaware of those basics, that just getting a BIP number doesn't mean there's centralized coordination or that it somehow is elevated status or that it's now official or that it's now everyone has to do it. No, not at all. Another thing that everyone should be aware with BIPs is that it's not just consensus changes. It can be all kinds of different changes. Like consensus changes can be BIPs, non-consensus changes that do impact maybe like the transaction relay protocol, like the peer-to-peer protocol between nodes. It's not consensus layer, but it absolutely has interoperability effects, can be a BIP. But it also can be things like language.
Yeah, that's fair.
Like what you call it doesn't, so it actually, I think it's an appropriate, even if you believe that it's not going to be this top down thing, it's still appropriate to be a BIP as a communication vehicle.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
That's my only point about BIP, but I agree, like top down, that's not really how this is going to happen or really can or should happen.
Cool. And then just on the coordination, it sounds like if it were to be that, River, Coinbase, Cash App, et cetera, we're all trying to make a moment of something like this, would we expect to see that take a year or two from now? Like that's not any kind of thing that would happen I assume that would just take a while. Is that if somebody wanted to change it, would that be kind of in the years time frame versus like months?
I mean, it's impossible to predict, but I mean, it could range greatly, right? If there was like this silent majority, like again, I had private conversations with a few folks liking this idea. If somehow that was like the case with many people throughout the space, maybe things move quickly, but that's probably not the case. I suspect most people in Bitcoin haven't even thought about this much at all. And that's why a lot of the reaction was negative, because like you tend to, if you've not thought about it, a new idea, you tend to quickly gravitate to what the drawbacks would be. And so we saw that reaction, and then we'll see over time how many people spend some more mental cycles on it and actually become persuaded by the arguments to do it. And so the higher percentage of people that get convinced, the faster they get convinced, the faster we would see this happen. But this is not some urgent problem that needs to be solved. Right. I could easily see it never happening. I could easily see it happening over 10-year time frame, led by Bitcoin as a currency, which is a long-term.
Right. And actually, I guess I sort of touched on this. It wasn't meant to be a dig, but I kind of said, like, I think we need payments to be somewhat mainstream and growing. If we're going to rely on payment vehicles to drive that kind of adoption, we actually need those use cases to grow. And my understanding right now is that it's like small but growing and compounding. And I wonder if there's anything we could talk a little bit about, like the state of payments, or are there any high level metrics? What's going on? Like, what can we know about payments? And then I hear a lot of people say things like Lightning is dead. And obviously, like, you don't think Lightning is dead. And there's lots of smart people who don't think Lightning is dead. So like, what are they getting wrong?
Do you mind? I had a couple other points I wanted to make about
the
unit thing. Do you mind if we like wrap that up first? And then absolutely excited about the next topic. Something that I could imagine making this change occur sooner is if exchanges did to see it to their benefit to change the units for either of the reasons I mentioned earlier, like
for trading,
perception, or they had data that showed a lot of their traders weren't buying Bitcoin, or like newcomers to their product weren't buying Bitcoin because it was perceived to be too expensive, or maybe they do it. But now, speaking that out loud, I actually think it's the opposite, because it would like give reasons not to buy altcoins and reduce trading. It basically would probably produce more stackers and people who just exclusively invest in Bitcoin, which is generally bad for their business. So
do you think the high price of Bitcoin causes people to not buy Bitcoin, go for the other things, and that's a more profitable type of purchase because
means you're less likely
go in and out of it?
You're more likely to go into Bitcoin once and stay there instead of like, oh, I'm going into shitcoin 4206969. Although what that does leave open for is all of these sort of Bitcoin native exchanges, right? So, in my mind, I'm invested in a number of these exchanges, which are Bitcoin only. So these would be things like BitNob in Nigeria, BIPA in Brazil, Yopaki in Mexico. These guys are all over the world. Osmo in Central America. For them, they do have exactly the use case you're saying. They don't offer any shitcoins. They don't want to encourage trading. They do want to encourage more normal people to buy. So to me, actually, they seem like the natural first movers, because they have like people that certainly don't have $100,000, maybe only 1% or 0.1% of that. So maybe they'll be the ones to start the traction.
That's a great point. You should maybe follow up with them and just like, not like pitch it, but just like.
Have you seen the BIP guys?
See the BIP. No, did you see this? And what do you think? I'd be curious to hear like what their take is. I agree that set of folks in Bitcoin, I think, are logical adopters of this in the near term.
Yeah.
Can I see a question from the chat? What about bits? Is that
Are we live, DK? Oh, I didn't realize there was a live chat. Oh, cool.
Oh yeah.
How do we see it?
Yeah, how do we see this live chat?
Just over on the right, do you see a little chat icon? Yeah, just tap on that. And then
wait, under studio chat?
Yeah, like this. Do you have like a menu bar along the right hand side?
A live stream chat. Oh, sweet.
Yeah.
Hey, we got some listeners. What's up?
Yes, so someone asked, what about bits? So first of all, thanks for the question. We actually want to encourage audience questions. So
yeah, this is exciting.
It's great to even know someone's listening. That's
awesome. Even if they're trolling us, it's totally.
But we want the show to be useful. So please, more questions, the better. So what about bits? Bits, actually, when I first started spending time on Bitcoin full time, like in 2017, I was a bits maxi. I was a proponent of bits. I think Jimmy.
Is bits the same as? I thought you said millibits was what you were, at least what I remember you advocating.
Well, maybe there's a flavor of that at some point or a phase, but bits. I think Jimmy Song proposed it like way back when. I think it was 100 or like 1 millionth of a Bitcoin, something like that. Or maybe, anyway, it's somewhere in between what sats are today and a Bitcoin is today. I think it felt pretty good then because sats were still too minuscule. But now that we're at $100,000 Bitcoin, all of a sudden everyone's like, oh, $1 million Bitcoin. And all of a sudden, like a sat is a penny. So, yeah, I think I'm no longer a fan of. Well, I mean, the question could be interpreted two ways. One is the unit of account that's a different decimal place. I'm no longer really a fan of that. The other way this
The honey badger.
The other interpretation of it is like we should call sats bits. I do like bits better than sats. It's just a nickname of Bitcoin. And so again, like none of us control what people call this stuff. Even if there's like a trend towards what John Carvalho has in his BIP and people start calling it Bitcoin, I could absolutely imagine colloquially people just shorten Bitcoin to bit. I sent you 2,000 bits. So again, I'd see that as being emerging. Like my own opinion, yeah, that's cool. I like that.